Health is a thing many of us take for granted until it leaves us, be it temporarily or permanently. There is an Arabic proverb that says, "Health is a crown that the healthy wear, but only the sick can see it." But what if that physical health of yours, the thing being challenged by sickness, is the very base and the sole foundation for your career and even your self-image? And what do you do when no one can seemingly help you in that situation? Today, we will look at an athlete's persistent struggle against her own body in order to achieve her dream of becoming a world-class runner. But before we do that, hello everybody, it is good to have you here. I hope you are all doing well and swell going through flu season, because I am not, which is why my voice might sound a little different today. But regardless, my name is DocFeedy. I'm a MD who likes to talk about cases and true stories, most with a medical touch, that people such as you and I have suffered through. If you like what I do, stick around to see more. And with that out of the way, let's get into today's case. The Olympic Games. Since its inception in ancient Greece, this sporting event has single-handedly drawn countless numbers of spectators from across all cultures to witness the very best of athletes competing against each other in a rich and ever-expanding compendium of disciplines. These men and women have spent countless hours and gallons of blood, sweat and tears to their craft to be the very best, and they are idols to many. They constitute the very pinnacle of athletic performance, often defying the very limits of what we thought the human body to be capable of. The Olympic Games, often shortened to just the Olympics, are held every 4 years in 2 different forms, with typical winter and summer disciplines alternating every 2 years. Participating in the Olympics is a dream for many professional athletes. It not only means proudly representing your country, but it is also a testament and a test for your abilities, as they are weighed against those from equally dedicated athletes. To win a gold medal at the Olympics is thus to literally stand at the very top of the world, to be inscribed into the halls of fame of sports, and being admitted into a pantheon of equally exceptional athletes, akin to the mythological heights at the very top of Mount Olympus, from which the name of these games derives. Achieving such a dream requires sacrifice and borderline psychotic dedication. Nevertheless, many athletes undertake this arduous route to the top, not knowing if they will succeed. And among them was the US-American Gail Devers. Gail Devers, whose full name is Yolanda Gail Devers, was born on November 19, 1966, in Seattle, Washington. As for all professional athletes, her career started in her youth, where, after moving to California, she started running 800 meters in high school after her older brother spurred her on. Soon, however, she would reduce her distances after finding a special liking for shorter, more intense runs, and her specialty would end up being sprints between 60 and 100 meters, with or without hurdles, referring to herself as a hurdler and a sprinter. After graduating Sweetwater High School in California, she would later win the NCAA's, or National Collegiate Athletic Association's 100-meter dash in 1988 while attending UCLA, and simultaneously setting a national record of 12.61 seconds in the 100-meter hurdles. This was a record she would end up holding for 3 entire years. Keep in mind, this was when Gail was just 22 years old. And on account of all things, it seems rather obvious that she was a phenomenon, destined for greater things. And in the very same year of 1988, she was bound to participate in the 1988 Summer Olympic Games in Seoul, Korea, representing the United States of America and competing with the very best track and field athletes in the world. And thus she began training intensely for the competition, arguably the most important one of her life. Gail Devers was aiming to be at the top of the world. But just as she was climbing up the arduous mountainside it was to be an Olympian. The very thing that she relied on ended up breaking down. Her body. The rising star was about to fade away. But what exactly happened? As the Summer Olympics neared, Gail Devers would notice a significant and steady dip in her performance. She was running slower than she ever had. But that made no sense. She was supposed to be in the best shape of her life. And in her own words, something just felt off. But soon enough, problems would also start to appear outside of the tracks. Her nails would stop to grow. Her skin became scaly, and her hair was falling out. She would also experience extreme sleepiness and loss of energy, even though she could not sleep at night. She also ended up losing about 40 pounds and ended up reaching a critical weight of nearly 80 pounds, without seemingly changing any of her eating habits. It got to the point that she would experience heavy migraines and even several episodes of fainting. But most alarmingly, she was losing her vision. Her eyes were almost protruding from her skull. They were red, irritated, and dry, as she could not even fully close them when sleeping. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and it was getting worse. As an athlete, Gail Devers knew her body. She went to several different medical professionals, and yet, doctors couldn't find an answer for her ailments. Some would even tell her that she was just stressed from her intensive training, or that she was even just imagining things. Which is something you should, by the way, absolutely never say to a patient. Nevertheless, Gail Devers tried her best to train, and despite her symptoms, managed to qualify for the 100-meter hurdles in the Summer Games of Seoul in the same year. Unfortunately, she ended up not making it past the semifinals. Obviously, this was crushing. She had trained for so long, and just before the finish line, her own body had betrayed her. And it would be 4 years until the next Summer Games, and that, for an athlete, is quite a long time. What would be until then? Would her health get even worse? In her struggle to find answers, and amidst progressive symptoms, her relationship with her then husband and fellow athlete, R.J. Hampton, would fall apart. This is the state of mind Gail Devers found herself in at that time.
Meanwhile, my training had come to a stop. I covered up all my mirrors and I just wanted to black out the world. I felt like I'd lost myself. I was desperate for answers.
But Gail would not give up on her dreams. She kept imagining herself being back at the Olympics. So, not only would she continue training for the next games, but she would also continue her journey to discover what was wrong with her body. And the latter took her 2.5 years until she got an answer. Now, for all of you medically knowledgeable, what do you think of when I mention some of Gail Devers' symptoms? Bulging eyes, loss of weight, loss of hair, lack of sleep. What do you think? And what would be if, in addition to these symptoms and to her eye bulging, she also had an enlargement of the neck area, as well as a swelling on her shins? When hearing these 3 particular symptoms, some of you might have a light bulb go off in your heads right now. What Gail Devers was suffering from was an excess of thyroid hormones due to an autoimmune disease known as Graves' disease, and it was burning up her body's resources. The thyroid is an H-shaped organ situated in the ventral part of the neck, with ventral referring to an anatomical position facing the same way as the belly or the stomach. The thyroid's function is that of a gland. Glands are organs that actively produce and secrete active compounds involved in different physiological functions in the human body. If these substances are released on the surface of the organ itself, then the aforementioned gland is a so-called exocrine gland. Examples of these include, but are not limited to, the salivary glands, or the pancreas secreting digestive enzymes that end up assisting in dissolving food and facilitating nutrient absorption in the small intestine. In contrast, if a substance is produced in a gland and is then secreted into the blood to activate, regulate, or inhibit a certain biological process somewhere else in the body, then this gland is called an endocrine gland. These endocrine glands, such as ovaries or testicles, for example, produce hormones. Broadly speaking, a hormone is any molecule or compound that serves as a signaling agent to regulate cell and tissue function and aid in maintaining homeostasis, aka a steady balance in the functioning of biochemical processes in the body. This may not be the most precise definition, but due to the sheer variety of glands, hormones, and complex mechanisms throughout the entire body that hormones are involved in, this definition is the best approximation of hormones I could put together. But back on topic, the thyroid, as we established, is an endocrine gland, which is why thyroid conditions are within the treatment realm of endocrinologists, meaning doctors specializing in the treatment of diseases that involve the disruption or dysregulation of hormonal networks in the body. And the condition that affected Gail Devers, known as hyperthyroidism, is one of them. Hyperthyroidism is defined as a pathological shift in thyroid activity with an excess production of these thyroid hormones. These hormones being triiodthyronine, also known as T3, and thyroxine/tetraiodthyronine, known as T4. Numbers in their respective names refer to the number of iodine atoms in their structures, as iodine is an essential mineral that is necessary for us to consume in order to produce these thyroid hormones, whose base structure is derived from the essential amino acid known as tyrosine. Looking at them from a functional perspective, T3 and T4 hormonally serve the same function, as I will elucidate later. But the human body being efficient, why would it waste energy creating the same hormone twice? So let me explain. Consider the hormones T3 and T4 two sides of the same coin. Of these two hormones, T3 is the more powerful, but less durable one. It is 3 to 8 times more potent at the target cells than T4, but its half-life is also just about 20 hours, whereas T4 has a half-life of 190 hours. T4 is a more lucrative, safe storage option for thyroid function that can be transformed into its more active form, which is T3, at the target cell when needed. Compared to a real-life example, T4 is like a boxer's jab, his leading hand, used more commonly to set up a combo, as it is easier and expends less energy, whereas T3 is the heavy hitter, the cross, that does most of the work, but can't also be thrown that often. These thyroid hormones are essential in multiple sites throughout our body. So, to keep it simple, consider thyroid hormones as stimulants for our metabolism. They regulate energy expenditure, elevate heart volume output, oxygen usage, and lead to heat generation. And they also act in our digestive tract. In childhood, they also stimulate the development of bones and nerves, meaning that an excess of thyroid hormones leads to metabolic overdrive. There are several different entities leading to hyperthyroidism, but Graves' disease constitutes the most common one in developed countries. Each year, it newly affects 1 out of 5,000 people, with women 5 to 6 times more affected than men, and a usual manifestation between 30 and 60 years of age. Its main cause is a genetic predisposition, with many possible triggers such as viral infections, iodine, or certain drugs being discussed. What makes Graves' disease special is its autoimmune pathophysiology. Graves' disease key feature is the production of antibodies directed towards the receptors on the surface of the thyroid. These antibodies are called anti-TSH receptor antibodies, or TRAbs. As their name implies, They bind and occupy the receptor for a hormone known as TSH. This TSH hormone is the main regulator of thyroid hormone production and is controlled through a negative feedback loop via signaling from T3 and T4 to the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland in the brain. Basically, the less thyroid hormones there are in the blood, the more TSH is produced in the anterior pituitary gland, and vice versa. However, in Graves' disease, this fickle balance is thrown off due to the aforementioned TSH receptor antibodies that permanently bind and stimulate the TSH receptor and quote-unquote fake a constant stimulation to produce more thyroid hormones, leading to an unchecked loop of hypermetabolism. The classic symptom triad of Graves' disease is the following. 1. The swelling and protruding of the eyes, known as exophthalmos, such as in the case of Gail Devers. Secondly, a diffuse swelling of the thyroid, known as goiter, can also be seen and reach extreme cases. Lastly, and most rarely, mixed edema can be seen, which is an inflammatory and infiltrative condition of the skin associated both with hypo and hyperthyroidism, and in the case of Graves' disease, is most often localized in the shins. Additionally, Gail Devers' loss of hair and scaly skin, as well as loss of weight, are explained by the aforementioned hypermetabolism. Restlessness and nervousness, as well as heat intolerance, are also typical symptoms. Her fainting episodes can be explained by the Graves' disease as well, as it can lead to an elevation of heart rate and may even trigger rhythm disorders that can manifest through physical exercise. In the case of Gail Devers, she also ended up developing an associated condition called thyroid eye disease, or TED, leading to inflammation of the fatty, muscle, and connective tissues behind the eyes that can lead to severe irritation and even blindness. A disease Gail Devers would eventually end up being an advocate for. So, how does one diagnose Graves' disease? Once one has correctly identified the symptoms, diagnosis is technically pretty easy. The first step is doing blood work by measuring TSH as well as T3 and T4 levels, and additionally proving the existence of TSH receptor antibodies in the blood, which is in over 90% of the cases. An ultrasound of the thyroid can then be performed, which can not only show enlargement of the thyroid, but also a so-called thyroid inferno, which is a phenomenon that happens throughout the entire thyroid and reflects an increased vascularity and pronounced pulsing pattern in Graves' disease. This generalized thyroid inferno pattern helps it to be differentiated from entities in which only one or several parts of the thyroid cause hyperthyroidism. Finally, a scintigraphy of the thyroid can also be performed. This is an imaging technique in which a very small quantity of a specific radioactive agent is ingested that ends up being metabolized by the thyroid and shows its active zones, which, just like the aforementioned thyroid inferno, shows a generalized elevation in thyroid activity. After now almost 3 years, Gail Devers had her diagnosis, and treatment could finally be started. This meant that she would soon be able to get another shot at the Olympic gold medal. Right? Treatment of Graves' disease is actually pretty straightforward. Not easy, but straightforward. So-called thyrostatic medication can suppress hormone production in the thyroid. Thus, it can be used in all forms of hyperthyreosis, and not only in Graves' disease, but does not constitute a curative option, as the use of these drugs can lead to a relapse later, and does not treat the underlying cause of Graves. In case of therapy failure or relapse under this medication, or under a withdrawal test, a definitive therapy should be performed. And by definitive, this means either surgically removing the thyroid or disabling it through a therapy called radiotherapy, also known as RT. This involves ingesting a radioactive variant of iodine, known as iodine-131, or I-131, that is then specifically absorbed by the thyroid. Once absorbed, the I-131 emits a short-length beta radiation that leads to massive local cell death in the thyroid, and thus loss of thyroid function. So, in short, eating or drinking radiation. This treatment option can cure Graves' disease, but often leads to a functional lack of thyroid hormones that needs to be substituted for during the remainder of the patient's life. and the latter is exactly what Gail Devers chose to do. In 1990, she underwent radioactive iodine treatment, which did cure her Graves' disease, but functionally disabled her thyroid to a degree that she needed to start thyroid replacement therapy by ingesting a synthetic form of the T4 hormone, also known as levothyroxine. This substitution, however, is not a big deal, since this involves just taking 1 tablet of levothyroxine each early morning and undergoing regular blood work. The problem with Devers' radiotherapy were the side effects of the radiation itself, which can lead to painful inflammation and damage to local tissue, such as the skin or the upper gastrointestinal tract. During radiotherapy, a year later, in February of 1991, Gail Devers woke up one day with a blister on her left foot so big she couldn't put her shoe on it. According to a Guardian interview, her podiatrist at the time told her that this was not related to radiotherapy. But soon, Devers was unable to walk, crawling to her bathroom on her hands and knees, and had to be rushed to the hospital in Los Angeles. The medical team there told Devers that an amputation of her feet might be necessary, due to the damage that the radiation had caused. The specific reasoning behind the amputation was not specifically stated in any text, but I can only assume that the radiation had caused massive inflammation, and most likely also an infection of the feet. The world came crashing down on Gail Devers. What once her autoimmune disease had threatened, now the very same treatment that had cured her was claiming its toll. Her very own body and life, and more specifically, her feet, the very part that had brought her forward, literally and metaphorically. Gail Devers had no choice but to pray for a swift recovery, and miraculously, she was granted mercy. The complications from radiotherapy subsided, and she started training again in March of 1991, a month later. It had been 2.5 years since she had last trained. But Devers had a dream, and she continued chasing it. In 1991, she won silver at the 100-meter hurdles at the World Championship, and using the smaller success to catapult herself to the top again, she would end up participating in the 1992 Summer Olympics in Barcelona, Spain. Just 19 months before, her life had been in danger unless her feet were to be amputated, and now she was competing with the world's best sprinters. And compete she did. She, along with 4 other runners, finished extremely close, needing a photo finish to determine the winner. And at last, Devers was shown to be the very first by just a few centimeters, as all runners had finished within 0.06 seconds of each other. Finally, she had obtained her first gold medal, and not her last, since she would win a total of 14 gold medals in her entire career, 3 of which at different Olympic Games. In 2012, she was admitted to the United States Olympic Hall of Fame, where all of her accomplishments are listed in detail. And other than these athletic achievements, there is another thing that makes Gail Devers stand out, which is her signature long fingernails, which were always meticulously designed, and so long to the point that she had reportedly changed her starting position to accommodate for her nail design. Remember one of the initial symptoms that Devers had reported? Graves' disease had made her hair fall out and made her nails stop growing. But it could not stop her from going on, even when the disease had brought her literally to her knees. And as her nails grew again, she also ended up growing into the athlete that she had dreamt of being. And I just think that that's a really nice image to leave you with. This has been DocFeedy. Thank you for watching, and stay safe out there.